NAAJA's issued their apology. Where to from here?
They're apologising to Priscilla in the most grovelling terms. They should be apologising to the kids that have languished in Dondale and their parents. They should be apologising to all the Aboriginal clients that they haven't properly, professionally represented. They should be apologising to the Aboriginal community of the Northern Territory for failing Aboriginal people. They should be apologising to every taxpayer in Australia for wasting our money on their own self-aggrandisement.
So in terms of quantifying NAAJA, do we sort of know how many people NAAJA represents, its funding pool?
It's an interesting question because I think that's part of the problem. I know in everything that we've reported on, and when you go to look at, okay, what is the funding breakdown? How much money is this organization getting from the federal government, from the NT government? I can't find it anywhere.
All of these kind of questions should be demanded by the media, but the media doesn't do its job anymore. The media is supposed to interrogate powerful institutions and inform the community as to the facts. You know, the media is more important, dare I say it, than NAAJA. And if you haven't got a media working in your society, you haven't got a free society.
Hey guys, I was checking out our data for the last month and realized that over 90% of the people watching our videos are not yet subscribed. If you've ever found value in our videos or enjoyed the conversations, hit that subscribe button now. It really helps our channel more than you can imagine, and it's the only thing I'll ever ask from you. We hope you enjoyed this episode. All right, well, let's get this show on the road. Gentlemen, for our audience's benefit, this is what could be considered a special edition of the NextGenNorth podcast. Joining me today is Chris Walsh, the editor of ND Independent and a recent Walkley Awards nominee, so thanks for joining us. And John Lawrence, SC, prominent barrister in Darwin. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Look, something that's been a real topic of conversation recently is NAAJA, the North Australian Aboriginal Justice Agency, embroiled in a fair bit of turmoil, I guess you could say, to put it lightly. I guess the best way to kick off, I think, for those that don't know, is to maybe just start from the start in chronological order. We don't want to get too deep into the history of it, but if we could maybe just start off with the circumstances surrounding NAAJA's inception.
Yeah, well...
And you were there for that?
No, I wasn't. It was 1972. I wasn't born. He lied to begin the podcast. No, but it was 1970. It was Gough Whitlam. He established Aboriginal legal services in every state and territory as part of the new Labour regime. Mm-hmm. And it flowed from bona fides efforts by lawyers in every jurisdiction who were basically doing an Aboriginal legal service free. And so there was clearly a demand, sadly, because of the contact with the justice system with Indigenous people. So he set them all up in 72, 73. I think the very first one was either Kalas, Nalas, or perhaps the Redfern Legal Centre in Sydney, but they were all round about the same proximity and time. And I was solicitor in charge in the 90s, so I learned a bit about that because I used to go cap in hand every year to the federal government to seek more money. And I learned that from memory, they were all given basically the same budget, and it wasn't really tested as far as their demand was concerned. But I think they got about $1 million each to kick off the proceeding, and they've basically only received not much more than that through percentages as the 30, 40, 50 years have gone by.
And you said there was was there a central one and a northern one? Or
yeah, and in the territory, there was traditionally, up until recently really, there was the Central Australian Aboriginal Legal Aid Service, CALAS with a C, and the top end was covered by NALAS, which is the North Australian Aboriginal Legal Aid Service. And I worked at NALAS from 92 to 97, and I think NALAS became NAAJA around about 2000 something. And then it grew bigger and not better and took in Catherine and Alice Springs, and it became NAAJA, which wasn't a good move, but it did. And it's become a huge, huge organization, and in size, logistics, etc. But also, it's an incredibly important organization because it's got as its responsibility representing people that need more legal protection than anyone because of their vulnerability, which is Indigenous people. So it's a very important organization. It's, in my opinion, it's the most important legal practice in Australia because of the 30% are Aboriginal in the territory.
Right.
And so it's got massive responsibility, and living in a period where, you go straight to jail if you're Aboriginal, and it's got worse and worse. And so they need the best defenders in town.
So in terms of quantifying NAAJA, do we sort of know how many people NAAJA represents, its funding pool, that sort of thing? Because you say it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Do we have any idea specifically?
Well, it's an interesting question, because I think that's part of the problem. I know in everything that we've reported on, and when you go to look at, okay, what is the funding breakdown? How much money is this organization getting from the federal government, from the NT government? I can't find it anywhere. I mean, I think it's somewhere around 16, 17 million a year now.
NAAJA.
And that would be from the federal government, maybe. I don't know what the NT's kicking in. But it doesn't seem to be one of those operations where the glass jar's there and we can see how much money's going and where it's all going. I think that's part of what the issue is here. And of course, it gets bigger, like John said. It will need more funding, and we've now got a government in place that has this policy of being tough on crime, as they call it, which is really code for it. We're going to put more Aboriginal people in jail,
right?
And more charges are going to be coming. So, how big does that have to get? How much more money do they need, and are they spending it properly? And that's part of the problem I think we're in right now. We don't know.
Well, that prompts the question to me: is like, as more these organisations get bigger and they get more funding, do then the Aboriginal the outcomes for Aboriginal people get worse? So how do we reconcile those things?
I think there's a lot of other reasons why outcomes are worse.
I'm not saying that that's the primary, that, or even singular, but
it's almost ironic.
Yeah, that's right. More money and worse outcomes for Indigenous people.
I think what has to be appreciated is it's federal money,
right?
And it's always been federal money. So they've never been funded by the Northern Territory government. However, in recent years, for reasons that I don't know, the Northern Territory government became part of the funding arrangement.
Like managing the money somehow.
Something like that. My understanding is that the federals still give the money, say 16 million. And for some reason, the NT government's got a say in then passing that on
the administration.
To NAAJA. Now, that smells of politics.
Right.
And it probably is. But other than that, I don't know. But it's very important to appreciate this has always been federal money. And so therefore, if NAAJA is stuffing up, then it's Mark Dreyfus's responsibility.
Right.
If there is sufficient evidence to suggest that you're going to have to do something about funding an organization that's in chronic disrepair. So it's his responsibility, and he's the federal attorney general, and he's a Labour politician, and that's relevant to, you see, in my opinion, the NAAJA nonsense has been going on for at least a decade, and something should have been done about it, and nothing has been done about it.
Right.
And a person that should have been doing things about it is the government, who's using our taxpayer money to fund this thing which they know is not working anywhere near well enough. But they have steadfastly refused, continue to do so, even at this stage of Mali.
Yep.
They don't seem to be capable of doing anything. So that's where we're at right now.
So by giving the Territory government, for example, responsibility for administering the money, does that then push culpability or dilute responsibility amongst our tiers of government when things go awry? Is that applicable here? Am I asking the wrong question?
No, I mean, look, I get what you're getting at with the question there. I mean, who is
who has
oversight?
Well, it's the NT Attorney General,
right?
And so, but what happens here? We get this thing where, remember, the attorneys general, the offices of the different attorneys general had to write to NAAJA to say, we've lost confidence in you. And then you had the National Indigenous Australians group, their organization, also getting on board and writing to it. It seems that there isn't just one person that's responsible or can do anything. And even then, the feds were saying, and I know, John, you called on it in our story the other day, for the board to be sacked or to resign. And you know, the feds have said, well, we can't actually sack the board.
Yeah.
We can't do anything. Our hands are tied. The NT government doesn't seem to want to do anything. There's been audits done. What was it, like a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, they were doing this audit. Oh, we're going to find out how this is being mismanaged. We haven't seen that audit.
Right.
Nobody's seen that. They're writing these letters just saying, well, we don't like what's going on. Well, I don't know how there's no control over it. That's what it seems to be.
Yeah, it's
like.
a crazy situation where, as I stressed at the beginning, it's such an important organization. And Australian taxpayers are funding it, and it's stuffing up. It's totally mismanaged and chronic, and it's not doing anywhere near its job. And yet it would appear that the funders either can't or they refuse to hose them out.
So I think that's excellent background, which then begs the question, what's gone wrong? When did things start going wrong? Is it the board? Is it the executive leadership? I think there's been, you know, really long-term players in this. I don't know who would be best to take. Maybe Chris, if you want to touch on this, like when do you think the rot started to set in?
Well, like John would say, probably a very long time ago, and part of that has to do with what we just spoke about, with the lack of structure. Clearly, I mean, they have obligations with the board and how they manage and how they govern themselves, but they weren't meeting that. I mean, we've had now in the last couple of years where they didn't have the requisite number of board members, and it didn't seem like anybody was overseeing that to say, well, wait a second, you're not meeting your obligations here as to how this funding works for you, so we're not going to give you the funding. I mean, you get in a situation like that where it gets difficult to do that, but to answer your question, I guess holistically, everything's wrong with it, right? There's not just one thing, but you've got it's clearly a bunch of characters now in there who have these personality conflicts with one another that can't seem to focus on the important job, which is representing, you know, at-risk Territorians who don't have a legal challenge, you know, anywhere. They need to have their legal rights protected when they appear before a judge, and they're forgetting their responsibility to Indigenous Territorians and getting more caught up in what it seems like office politics. I mean, some of these accusations that they were throwing around at Priscilla Atkins there was just wild stuff, and then she was throwing stuff back at them, and it just was like, you just got the sense, I did, John, I remember talking to you, no one's going to win here. No one's going to come out looking clean in this, and the ones who lose the most are the ones that they're supposed to be representing.
That's right. People languishing on remand. And
yeah, which is just a terrible situation all around. But from what I've seen and what we've covered and reported on, I mean, this is some pretty seriously dysfunctional people who somehow found themselves together. You know, it's like an old CLP government or an old Labour government where we said, how did all of these people
in the
find themselves together somewhere? But this seems to be what's happened at NAAJA.
You know, there's a virus going around the Western world, or at least the English-speaking world, which we're all really suffering under, and that is that there's no accountability, whether it's the banks, the robo-debt. This thing has emerged in the last 20, 30 years of our life, whereby people who are in positions of power can basically lie their proverbials off, stuff up to massive extents, and they don't get brought to book, unless, of course, they're an Aboriginal delinquent that stole a car. They still face accountability and they go to Don Dale. But this disease across the English-speaking world is everywhere, and it's actually explains to an extent NAAJA, because they are acting with such hubris, such arrogance, such privilege. They consider themselves untouchable. And I'm talking about the individuals that are in this board, or at least the ones that run the board.
Right.
A lot of the board members don't know really what's going on at all, but they attend because they represent a geographical region. But the people, the characters that are in there, consider themselves untouchable. I mean, the very fact that NAAJA this week released that media release saying that they apologized unreservedly and so forth to their opponent whom they alleged against. And the extent of that groveling apology would have demanded in any institution, immediate resignations from them because they were basically admitting to spending 2 years plus, spending millions on lawyers on allegations which they were now conceding were completely, they resiled from them completely. So you don't get a bigger stuff up than that, other than, of course, the indirect ones, which are deaths in custody, kids in Dondale, we don't have lawyers, men and women in jail that have been on remand for 12 months and haven't seen the lawyers. This is how the mismanagement manifests itself at the coalface, which is as important as anything. So you've just got A to Z on mismanagement and malfunction. And that's why I've been saying now enough's enough. And I blame now Dreyfus, because he knows all of this and more, and he hasn't got the political courage to say this organization has to be hosed out. The bridge of this ship needs to be completely hosed out. The board, upper management, the senior lawyer, they all have to go because they have failed miserably, and they have to be replaced with people that can do the job. And that triggers the next question, which is self-determination. And this is where this board has been really disgraceful, because they have provided ammunition for the right wing of politics who are always undermining self-determination. They have provided the perfect bazooka for the Duttons of this world to say, well, I told you so. Self-determination is a joke. It's historical. It has to go, which I don't believe in. I agree with self-determination. As long as you've got the right people who are qualified, have the integrity, the industry, and the commitment, which they had in the past. So they all have to go.
Right. So that said, does that, I understand that NAAJA is made up of Indigenous board members,
Totally,
members,
100%.
and you talk about self-determination, but also having the best people in the best roles to allow the best outcomes.
Exactly.
Is it an option then for NAAJA to open the board up to people outside of Aboriginality to try and sort of broaden that talent pool?
Yeah,
which will then result in those better outcomes.
This political requirement has allowed non-Indigenous lawyers,
right,
necessarily, because there aren't enough qualified, experienced gun lawyers, which is what you want. When you're running an organization like this, bearing in mind its importance, you have to go for the pursuit of excellence. You need the best managers. You need the best administrators. You need the best board members. You need the best principal lawyer. You need the best lawyers in crime, civil, and family, if you've got a family. You need the best, because Aboriginal people are the most exposed and the most vulnerable. Now, this organization pursues nothing. And now it's just chronic. It's just absolute chronic.
Well, but that's
it's mediocrity.
Problem, though, isn't it? Is what Stuart's saying about not having the right people in there. I mean, what was the turnover? How many chairs have they had now? Like in the past 18 months, it's crazy. But the principal lawyer too. I remember last year one of them quit, and the other lawyers were saying, well, we're not sure we can even go in and do our jobs anymore because you need that indemnity insurance from the principal lawyer.
Yeah, that's right.
And they didn't have anyone for a while. And there was a point where there was like 3 lawyers when there should have been 20 or something.
That's right. There's been an exodus of lawyers.
Where do you get the better people for this? Like,
well, you need the as a lawyer, it's the best job in town.
Right.
If you've got the stamina and the wherewithal to be able to do it, and you can't do it for long. I did it for 5 years. I reckon it was too much. It is a very taxing job, but it also brings great satisfaction and great experiences and so forth. So you can get the best lawyer. Traditionally, and we didn't mention this, but the NAAJAs and the CALASs, they used to get the best lawyers in town, and they weren't in town. They were from Melbourne, they were from Adelaide, they were from Sydney. They attracted QCs en masse to come up and do work at limited, if not free rates, because of the cause, because of the need, all of that. But if they're going to come up and they're looking at an organization that's managed by people who don't know what day it is, who have no real bona fides about the whole thing, it's not going to happen. And this has been happening now for at least 10 years or more. You're not getting quality lawyers going near the joint, and you can understand why.
But does opening up NAAJA to a broader talent pool, does that then empower the narrative that, again, rights are being taken away from Aboriginal people and they're not managing their own affairs? So you mentioned the right undermining self-determination. Does that then open up to attacks from the left about Indigenous positions of power maybe being outsourced outside of Aboriginal circles? How does that?
It will. I mean, I speak to lawyers now of my vintage and even younger who won't have a bar of criticising NAAJA because it's politically incorrect. They won't criticise a blackfellow organisation.
Right.
And yet I'm at the coalface. They're not. They're in Melbourne and Collins Street. And what's going on here is Don Dale. What's going on here is people on remand for 18 months. What's going on here is no lawyers. What's going on here is gross mediocrity and mismanagement. And Aboriginal people are being punished and all their families. So that's the reality. So one thing that we have to consider here is I agree with self-determination because I can remember from my own experience, the board was dynamite when I worked for NALAS. Pat Anderson was the chairman of the board. Ursula Raymond was on it. Really dynamic Aboriginal men and women who wanted to do the right thing by their community. But I question where is the Aboriginal community in the top end or even in the Territory generally? Why aren't they coming out and saying, get rid of this, we'll take over, move over? I don't know if it's there, to be realistic.
So are you sort of saying there's people with lack of vision in that respect? And is that a problem that's emblematic of Australia as more broadly? Like who are our people with vision these days? You know, is that a
absolutely
fair?
Just like non-accountability is reflected in NAAJA, so it would appear to me that there doesn't seem to be a lot of people stepping up with the credentials to take over from this board. And I mean, I'd like to think I'm wrong. You know, I probably am, but I would like for the board to be replaced by Aboriginal people that were up for it like they used to be.
Right.
But if that can't be done, then it's going to have to be replaced by somebody because the imperative here is the people that need lawyers.
Well, I guess just turning our lens to something more recent, that's the Priscilla Atkins fiasco. So NAAJA's issued their apology. They've accepted the federal court's findings. Status quo returns. Where to from here?
Yeah, that's what we're trying to figure out, right? I mean, look, they've gone into their cone of silence here now, right? We're asking them questions. Well, guys, this is when you need to come out and actually explain to the community what's going on.
Yeah.
And explain how you're going to start fixing things, and they're hiding out now. They're just not responding to media requests for comment. And I guess Priscilla's back. She's
I think she's CEO again.
Okay. I mean,
with that board.
Yeah. With the same board.
Knife her.
Yeah. So I don't know how that's even tenable now. I mean, I know that's one of the things in the wrongful dismissal case. You want your job back as one of the demands, but sometimes maybe it's not practical that happens. And of course, we'd seen these problems under her leadership anyway. It started to happen before that. So maybe it's time she takes a step back for the betterment of everybody in the Territory at this point, and we get some fresh people in there. But you know, I don't know where we find them, and I think ultimately, first of all, they need to come out and explain what the hell's going on and what's going to happen. How do they address all of these governance failures that happen, all of these accusations of money gone missing? I mean, this is some serious stuff that's gone on there that isn't just fixed because Priscilla Atkins comes back.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see some leadership there and some people come out and explain what's going to happen now.
Well, she's been there since 2007, from what I understand. So surely she accepts some culpability for the state of affairs, no?
No, she won't. I don't think. I think she's...
We haven't got her to.
I doubt it. I mean, that illustrates what I was saying earlier about the fact that they can think they can get away with going back to the status quo. I mean, that is Twilight Zone stuff. We're in Twilight Zone with NAAJA. That's crazy stuff.
Yeah.
It's crazy per se, but the fact that they're actually responsible for the suffering that's been going on and will continue like this is absolutely disgraceful. These people have no shame at all to be able to behave like this. And I should move my gun over and attack the media as well, because as usual, the media, this doesn't include NT.
So it's all right, Johnny. I'm used to it.
No, but the media are typically let us down, whereby instead of interrogating this Twilight Zone and demanding that they explain themselves and asking questions as obvious as how on earth could you possibly return to the status quo, bearing in mind what you've just went through. And by the way, how much money has this case cost the taxpayer? All of these kind of questions should be demanded by the media, but the media doesn't do its job anymore. The media is supposed to interrogate powerful institutions, governments of any colour, and inform the community as to the facts. And they don't do either anymore. The ABC just basically republishes the media release, and then they didn't go back to the NAAJA story. That was it.
Yeah.
Status quo.
And then, but for that, I'd say that the NT Independent does do that. We do interrogate, we do push them. We don't have the resources of the ABC to be on someone like Priscilla Atkins all the time. I wish I could run into her and then put a microphone in her face and say, "What are you doing?" I'd love to do that. But yeah, I take John's point, and it's kind of why we started the NT Independent and why we're doing things the way we're doing it, is that this stuff is so crucially important to the functioning of our society here in the Northern Territory, that establishments, organizations like this function correctly. As soon as you're getting that taxpayer money, as soon as you're getting the public funds, you need to have a certain level of accountability there. When that's not there, then things need to happen and people need to take action. Leaders have to start taking action. We still haven't seen that here. But yeah, I agree with you a lot that the media, I've seen this so much now, just where John's right, they take a press release and that's it. And that's the end of it. And it's, well, let's just get it done.
So is it,
just can't do that.
Why would the media not take an active interest in this? Is it apathy amongst the audience? Is there no interest?
No, I can tell you the readership's there.
Okay.
When we cover this stuff, people are very much interested. Even your story the other day about.
So then there's ulterior motives as to why this.
I think it's just a general dumbing down incompetence level that we're at. Like John says, in the legal fraternity, so too in the journalism community. Right. We've got a lot of young journalists here who don't probably have that knowledge that they need to interrogate organizations like that. And then there is the issue that you always come into with, they're an Aboriginal organization. We shouldn't be holding them to this high standard and demanding this, and then that's just problematic on its own. And
isn't that called the bigotry of low expectations?
Yeah.
So
and I think the ABC that explains the ABC to me. And I've been working with ABC for 30 years, and I've seen it deteriorate like everything else has. In days gone by, they would be interrogating this, notwithstanding the politics of it, which is sort of anti-Aboriginal, if you like, and anti-left wing, which the ABC is sort of labelled with. But I think that's what they're doing now. They just think we can't attack an Aboriginal organisation. 30% of our population is Aboriginal. It'll look bad for us, which is just the opposite of what the media should be doing, especially a national broadcaster. Because once again, we're paying for that. Yeah. So we're being failed on all accounts. I say that, the media is more important, dare I say it, than NAAJA. And if you haven't got a media working in your society, you haven't got a free society. You haven't got democracy. And that is massive at the moment.
So who are the voices that could then cut through? But is it political voices that need to have more of a say in this, or?
Well, the right wing will jump on it, probably, and exploit it, sadly. Now, what's going to happen, I don't know. But, I would imagine there's always been afoot the desire to get rid of Aboriginal organisations. I remember when I was working at NAAJA, NALAS, John Howard got voted in 1996, and I was the solicitor in charge, and Pat Anderson was the chairman of the board. And from the very first day that he got in, on the Sunday, John Howard appeared on what was called the Sunday programme then, which is a good current affairs programme. And he said that one of his things that he was going to do was cut funding to Aboriginal organisations that weren't working. And Pat Anderson said to me, because she was wise and knew what day it was, and she was Indigenous, she says, "I knew this would happen. He'll be going after us." So for some reason, because it's not big money, in the scheme of things, it really isn't. But for some reason, ideologically with the Liberal Party, they want to see the end of your NAAJAs and your equivalents. So I would think that's why
federal
Dreyfus is probably digging in, because he's being an opponent to the opposition.
Mm-hmm.
So my prediction is if the opposition gets in Canberra, they're definitely gone. But they might be gone now anyway. I mean, how much can the community take?
Well, and it'd be interesting what the NT government does, right? In their role here and of managing the money or whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
And are they still conducting an audit? Is that
Well, but the last I heard, yeah, it was still going on. Like, I haven't found anything that showed us that it had happened. I don't think it was included in that letter earlier this year from the attorneys general. But yeah, I would love to see the results of that. I don't know if they'll ever make that public.
But should an audit become public?
Yeah.
Is it just a toothless tiger in that sense anyway? Like, would anything happen anyway?
Well, the lack of accountability is everywhere, like John said, and everything that we see. I mean, what are you going to do? Give it to the ICAC? Like, you know, right? That's become a punchline here in the Northern Territory. What are they going to investigate? Mismanagement of money?
We'll leave that to another podcast. I reckon. that one.
I think.
Yeah, it's just, but that's what I'm getting at. That everything's broken here.
Yeah.
And
so where do we start then? Like, I mean, I keep circling around to solutions, and it just seems like, what thread do we pull out here before everything sort of unravels?
Well, I think you've got to slow down with solutions, because I think the first thing you have to do is put all the lights on in the room.
Okay.
And the room is deliberately dimmed by the authorities, by the establishment. They are so powerful, the establishment.
Right.
So they've got the media basically lying in the corner, not questioning them. And this could just go on forever and ever. So I would have thought, without the media, you, Stuart, have to replace it in a sense by informing the community about the truth of these matters fully and genuinely. Once the community are apprised of what the reality is, then you can rest assured, and there's a lot of people out there already seriously dissatisfied and knowing that this is not working. You can rest assured that things can happen for the better. But we're not going to do it without the community being informed, which is absolutely key to the establishment, the status quo continuing in the way it does. I mean, the public service, that whole animal is really open for questioning. And we need to do it. We need to interrogate it.
Because it's crumbling in front of us, the whole
and we're
structure.
Paying for it. We're paying for it.
Yeah, and you look at the court system, the justice system here. We've talked about this, John, but even with legal aid, right, and the issues that are going on there, where they don't have enough money, people are getting bailed now because they can't get court dates for next year because legal aid's not. I mean, there's something seriously wrong with the Northern Territory, and we do need to. You know, what we've been doing is exposing it, and I've been doing this. And look, even when I was at ABC, I was putting together the indictment, you know, on the Northern Territory for the federal government to come in and start doing something. And everything I think I do at the NT Independent is also has that kind of objective behind it. Is here is all of this, if you lay it out, of how broken the Northern Territory is, and we need somebody to come in and help here and get us functioning again, because we're ceasing to function. And when you see that in the court system, when people are going to jail, when they're, you know, being left on remand for 18 months, like you say, we're getting other things where maybe violent offenders are just being turned and told to go back out because there's not enough system. The system's so broken that they can't even get a court date for the trial. I mean, it's just such a bad position to be in, and I don't see how the CLP with their tough on crime policy, you know, sees that as holistic enough to know that, well, if you're going to bring in these kind of policies, that there has to be other things going on behind the scenes here, like, you know, those early intervention program stuff, the stuff Labor talked about. The Labor created this problem, really. 8 years of saying, and it wasn't because their ideology was wrong per se, it's just that they didn't back it up with action. So they'd say, remember Gunner, who I hold him personally responsible for the state we're in right now. I mean, that guy failed so badly, so miserably. But he came in and he said, well, we're going to do generational change. And we're going to fix this early on, and early intervention stuff. And then he just didn't do it. There was no funding. There was no programs put in place. It just did not happen. Along the way, all these other things started. They were already fractured. I think the judicial system overall in the Northern Territory, and all of it started coming apart. NAAJA, legal aid, everything just starts falling apart here. The prisons start getting overcrowded. you know, and then the new government comes in and says we're going to be tough on crime. But those, but they're not backing that up. They're not looking at that holistically. And how do you actually do that? Because like we said before, Stuart, you and I were talking about this on here one time. You know, it's just saying you're going to build more prisons. That's not going to fix anything here. Like that is not going to fix our problem and our larger malady. And so I don't know, until we start having that conversation, and like I said before, we've got to get politics out of the crime situation too, right? Like get everybody on the same page of how we can actually fix this, all parties, all independents, take the politics out of it, and let's start actually having those discussions on what needs to be done to make the Northern Territory function again, because it is just so broken.
But do you think that's possible, getting everyone on the same page politically, when it seems like the solution to these things are ideologically driven in a lot of cases?
That's the disappointing thing. That's why you got to take that politics out of there. Yeah, I mean, getting the leaders to agree to that, I guess, is probably not going to happen, but something needs to happen. And look, if the leaders aren't going to do it, then we get rid of the leaders. And we start doing this, like I said before, maybe we do need a bunch of independents in there who can all get on the same page and say, at least this is what's going to fix the Northern Territory right now. We all need to be behind this. And if you're not, get out of the way.
I think getting back to what you were speaking about before, should NAAJA fall over, what are the implications of that, not to just the people it represents, society more broadly? Is there something that takes its place? Can you ask the private sector to help out at all? Like, what does that look like to you?
It's difficult, you know. It's easy for me to criticize everything and anything, and then everybody says, well, what's the solution? And
I'm not looking for a quick fix here, by the way, John.
Yeah.
It's just that, like, what is going to be the first domino that starts the fix?
Replacing or
it doesn't have to be replacing. Yeah, rectifying, just fixing the problem, which is what I think everyone wants.
Yeah, I guess. You know, I'm listening to Chris here, and it's ironic, of course, it's 50th anniversary of self-government. And this place is, you know, the expression failed state is on everybody's lips. Failed state, which you almost don't want to say if you're a Territorian, you know, but it is what it is. And it's undoubtedly, as Chris explained, it's collapsing on so many levels: health, education, law. Their standards and their qualities are so much degraded compared with when I first came here. And it's an absolute fact. There's no getting around it. And yet the status quo, whether it's NAAJA status quo or this whole government status quo, where we can just keep going in this trajectory and it can't be turned around like an oil tanker. And I don't believe it can be turned around. I believe it can. And you've just got to go with small steps, to use an expression. And to return to your query on NAAJA, I would have thought a feasible outcome would be to hose out the board. Now, I don't know how you can do that legally. Apparently you can. So Dreyfus would just have to say, right, you're not going to get another dollar until you all leave. Take it or leave it.
Okay.
They all leave, and then there'll be a mechanism to replace them with people who are willing and able, and that might have to include non-Indigenous people.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
how is the board appointed or elected? How is it the membership of NAAJA, or what's?
It's a mess.
Look, I'm too young to try and the listeners are too young to get their head around this.
Okay,
but it's a complete rort. The board at NAAJA changed the constitution, which created a pool of voters which is minuscule. It might even only be 50 people are entitled to actually vote for the people who make up the board. So it's an absolute nonsense. So I think Dreyfus has to say, get the constitution over here and we'll amend it. And then, and the reason I must reiterate, the only reason I'm saying this is because it's anarchy. People are suffering. People are in jail now that shouldn't be in jail. Their wives are waiting on them getting out, and they're not going to get out because they're not going to get bail because they haven't got a lawyer. And the lawyer they've got has just come up from Melbourne who can't spell Adelaide River. You know what I mean? So it's really crucial. This is the fierce urgency of now happening. So I think the Federal Attorney General should do that, replace the Constitution, and get on the bridge of the ship, people who are best qualified to steer it in the right direction, which would include appointments and so forth. It's an emergency situation. It's a catastrophe, and action accordingly should be taken and can be taken and must be taken.
But is there not an apparatus within NAAJA itself, through its membership, maybe the redrafting of the Constitution to give a broader cohort maybe of membership the ability to appoint or elect their own representation? Is that not an option as well?
And it's too late for that, in my opinion. Too late. There may be. I actually don't think there is. There may be, but even if there is, it's too late. They've done their dash. This board, what they've been there for years, doing nothing except look after their own interests. They have no concern for their clients. They're apologizing to Priscilla in the most groveling terms. They should be apologizing to the kids that have languished in Dondale and their parents. They should be apologizing to all the Aboriginal clients that they haven't effectively, properly, professionally represented. They should be apologizing to the Aboriginal community of the Northern Territory for failing Aboriginal people. They should be apologizing to every taxpayer in Australia for wasting our money on their own self-aggrandizement. So I think my views on this are fairly clear, and that is that it's like Hercules moving the river in the Iliad or whatever, where you just clean out the stables. The whole stables needs to be cleaned out. Gut them out, start afresh, build on the rubble.
Chris, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on the remedy.
I think when you have, an organization that is that fundamentally broken, that is the only way to fix it. And then, the problem always becomes in the Northern Territory, where do we get the good people? And that's always been a thing here. And but you can't leave people in who are dysfunctional and who may be breaking laws and misappropriating money. I mean, they're still being investigated for that. We don't know where that investigation is right now. So the only way, clear it out, and let's try and get some better people in there. But like I said, I think it's a symptom. NAAJA and what we've seen here is a symptom of a larger malady facing the Northern Territory right now, and it doesn't look good.
I mean, there's a scenario looming, perhaps, which is, I don't know what comes after the Twilight Zone. But there is a scenario which is looming, which could go like this. Priscilla agrees to go back as the CEO, and she comes out with some media statement saying we've all reconciled and we're going to move forward and we're going to do this in the best interests of the media release was couched in similar. I mean, if that were to happen, and it could, I mean, we're living in an absurd time, and that's what the Twilight Zone is. If that was to happen, I just don't know how the community would react to it. You see, the problem is the community don't really give a tinker's proverbial.
Well, that's what I was sort of getting to
on.
Before with the apathy.
And that should have happened already. Like, that's the whole thing. That should have already happened from her, and it hasn't. So they're done.
And I think it's almost like a symptom of broader malaise. Like it's
definitely.
Education's failing or health's failing. Aboriginal justice is failing. I've got so much to worry about. I'm living in a cost of living crisis myself.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to feed the kids. Interest rates are high. It's just all these compounding things. Like it's very hard for people to even have the time to care about others at the moment. So I think there's a broader conversation there about the mess we're in.
And that's just reminding people that it's all connected. Everything's interconnected here in the Northern Territory. We're a small jurisdiction. Everything's connected. If something starts to fail like this, you're going to feel it one way or another. And look, that one I think is pretty easy when we see the justice system failing. I think people who've been victims of crime know that, that's a symptom of that. But it's so much broader too. I mean, it just gets to what our society is based on and how it is all crumbling down here now. And we've got to look at these things and fix them straight away, or it just gets worse.
Is there a catch-all fix here? Like if this problem gets fixed, then it will have a flow-on effect to the economy and that sort of thing? Or is if we fix the economy first and then it flows on to,
Well, there won't be an economy.
Yeah.
If everything's broken. It'll just shatter. So you've got to fix up your basic institutions if you want to live in a free democratic society. And, the indifference may well go to the fact that people don't even want to do that anymore. It's questionable whether people really do want to live freely.
Mm-hmm.
They're maybe more satisfied just watching Fox on the TV, drinking VB, going to work, moaning, whinging, etc. I mean, that's where we're at now. You know, people have been really zombified. So, you know, once again, completely convenient for the continuation of this trajectory, which leads to nowhere. So, you know, action's required, but whether people will take action, again, I go back to informing them fully and accurately as to what's happening.
Well, look, I don't know where to go from
Right.
there, to be honest. I think that's covered a hell of a lot of ground, and
Yeah.
you know, without sort of trying to circle back to the same sort of things about solutions and that type of thing, I think it's been a really robust conversation about a very important matter, and I think, you know, what you said, the most important legal institution we have in the Northern Territory, and we just have to hope that things get better. But
Well,
you know, is it incumbent upon us to make it better?
you bet. I mean, it's incumbent on us to not let this go away where they want it to go away too.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they want. They want us to just shrug, can't be bothered, won't criticise an Aboriginal organisation. For whatever reason, there are countless reasons why people won't get sufficiently involved in the running of their own village. And people need to get more involved so that there is accountability. So we need to keep coming back and revisiting whether it's NAAJA, ICAC, the legal system, the Department of Health. All of that needs to be interrogated. And I'm up for that.
Well,
Police.
that sounds like
And the
ICAC.
police.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a part 2 and a part 3 of what we've got here. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. It's really good, and hopefully the conversation continues.
Great. Thanks.
Appreciate it, guys.
Good on you, Stu.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.